the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. Marcus Benjamin here, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com for 50% off the annual subscription. Special promo today ends today. Make sure you take advantage of that. Use the promo code UMSPRING25. Plenty of information to kind of give you guys as far as recruiting is concerned. And also want to talk a little bit about the NFL draft, as Cam Ward is very, very likely going to be the number one pick of the NFL draft. And from what I gathered from the recruits over the weekend, that is really resonating with these prospects. And they are really seeing the development at the University of Miami. And here to talk about it all is my guy, Alex Donno, host of the Locked On Canes podcast, the best podcast in the game, besides this one, of course, the Storm Tracker podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Alex.
Hey, it's great to be back, Marcus. And I love it. 2 weeks in a row, I get to grace the airwaves of the Storm Tracker, man. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure having you. And Donno, the NFL draft is coming up, and Miami has a chance to kind of make history here with Cam Ward. He tore up the pro day last week. It was an amazing, to be honest. I get to tell my grandkids that I was at Cam Ward's pro day. In all seriousness, that could be a huge thing. So, but from what I gathered from the recruits over the weekend, I talked to plenty of kids at the University of Miami and also at the Rivals camp as well. And a lot of them talked about development, and really just seeing Cam Ward, who was likely going to be maybe a 6th round pick or something in that vicinity. And for him to, now vault himself up to the number one pick, it says a lot about Miami and how they developed Cam Ward. And I asked him actually after his pro day about the development at Miami. And, he said, that Alex Mirabal really kind of helped him as far as protection is concerned. And Shannon Dawson really helped him as far as staying in the pocket. So those two aspects, of course, are essential for an NFL quarterback. So just kind of hearing all that, Donno, how much do you think Cam Ward being picked number one will help Miami recruiting?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, Marcus, and we're seeing the tangible effects of it. At least we're starting to. And, a lot of people ask me like, hey, how come Miami didn't have like an even higher ranked class of, 2025, which is the one that those players signed like right after the season. But like my answer to that was a lot of those players were already kind of mostly having their minds made up, one way or another, while Cam Ward was doing all that he was doing on the field last season. So I've long been saying it. The real effects of Cam Ward on recruiting are going to be felt in this coming cycle in 2026, because this is the full recruiting cycle where these guys who were juniors in high school last year, minds not made up or fully made up, and they were watching Cam Ward out there doing what he was doing for Miami and really kind of turning hearts and minds in Miami's favor. So I think the tangible effect of Cam Ward is going to be felt more so in the class of 2026 than it was in 2025. Everything you say about Ward's development is true. And obviously he was a very good, excellent quarterback before he ever came down to Miami, but it was clear he was able to polish things up. He was able to have his best season in a Miami uniform. And I love the amount of grace that Ward shows, because he gives so much credit to Shannon Dawson, who's still at Miami, which is a good sign for future quarterbacks. You get to work under the guy that Ward speaks so highly of. And obviously any, young player, especially young quarterbacks who watched Miami this last year, know how good the offensive line is, and it should be very good, if not even better, this coming year in front of Carson Beck. And the interesting thing about Ward, I'm sure you feel the same way, Mark, is even though he only spent 1 year at the University of Miami, he so fully immersed himself in everything Canes, and he represents the U so well. It feels like the guy was here for 2 or 3 years. Like, it doesn't really feel like Cam Ward was just here, 1 year. And then, I think the other effect that Ward has, on recruiting, it's maybe less direct in terms of these young players, but he brought so much positive attention to Miami in 2024. The TV ratings were higher than they've been for Miami games in a long time, highest in the ACC, among the highest in the country. So there were just a lot more eyes on Miami. And of course, the actual on-field goals, Miami fell short of their biggest ones, but they still managed to win 10 games, play a lot of entertaining football, especially on the offensive side. So I think all of that really is magic with recruiting. But I want to pick your brain a little bit, Marcus, because when you talk about being out there talking to players, and this past Saturday, you were all over it with the post-practice and the pool party. I hear about so many of these guys that were on campus, some of the offensive linemen, and of course Miami, landed one in Joel Ervin over the weekend, but you had my guys like Keenyi Pepe that were out there, Carr from IMG Academy, Lamar Brown is out there, not an offensive lineman, but a player I really want. Derrek Cooper was out there at the pool party. Like, give me a confidence score on some of these guys, Marcus. Are we going to land some more play? And Cam Ward was out at practice this weekend as well. Are we going to land all these guys?
It's quite possible. I mean, just from the feedback from these recruits, you kind of feel like that Miami could get a majority of the guys that they're looking to target. And before I get into that, I do want to say that shout out to Cam Ward just for having a pro day or throwing at a pro day, because he didn't throw at the NFL Combine. And he wanted to throw at the Miami Pro Day just to highlight his guys, just to highlight guys like Xavier Restrepo, who we're seeing here on the screen here, catch basically a touchdown pass, and Jacoby George and Sam Brown and Elijah Arroyo, Cam McCormick, these guys. He wanted to highlight these guys. So shout out to Cam Ward. I think it may end up being the best transfer portal pickup of all time, just because of what it will create long term for this program. Miami will always have that selling point to recruits. Hey, we had the number 1 pick in the draft in 2025, and we took that in 1 year. So shout out to Cam Ward. Shout out to his parents as well, who I've seen on campus like a few times over the weekend. Shout out to him. But on to these recruits, man. What's really interesting to me is that Miami is in a really good spot for the big 3 of IMG. I'm just going to throw this out there. You got Breck Kolojay, you've got Keenyi Pepe, and then you've got Carr. Those, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
I always struggle with that one. That's why you notice I just said Carr when I said his. I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah. Let's just keep it to the last names. Kolojay, Carr, and Pepe. The big 3. And I asked all of them. I was just like, is there a chance all 3 of you guys will commit to Miami? And they all said, yeah. I mean, it would be one of the biggest recruiting stories probably ever. To get all 3 guys on this from that offensive line. So I think it's a possibility. I think Miami definitely gets at least 1. And if there's one of those 3 that I would say Miami is going to get, I would say it's Pepe. I think Miami's in a really, really good spot for Pepe. They started recruiting him when he was a freshman. And I think he is probably, if I had to guess or I had to make a prediction, I would say he is probably the guy. Kolojay, I think Ohio State and Georgia, these schools are probably maybe positioning themselves a little bit better than Miami. Although, I heard from Kolojay directly that Miami has kind of communicated to him that he's the number one player for them. So
Wow.
I've always been impressed with Kolojay. I saw him at a 5-on-5 tournament recently, and I thought he was dominant. You can check that video out on this YouTube channel, live from Gaines County. And I thought Carr, who was the only guy to perform at the Rivals camp on Sunday, Pepe and Kolojay did not participate. I thought he was impressive as well, and he described Alex Mirabal as a family member to him. He said, "I don't even look at him as a coach. I look at him more as a teacher and a family member." That's big, I think. So I would say Miami's probably in the best position probably to get Pepe, Carr probably second or 1A, 1B, and then Kolojay third. I think Miami is in a really good spot for Derrek Cooper as well. You mentioned
Yeah.
him as well. Derrek Cooper was on campus on Saturday, riding around on a scooter with Miami commit Jordan Campbell. They looked like they were just you know having a good time. Just kind of they looked like they were already students at the University of Miami. Derrek Cooper was in an all black Miami like jumpsuit, as well as Jordan Campbell as well. Campbell, it seems like he's getting close to maybe shutting down his recruitment. So that's good to hear because, Florida and are some teams that were very interested in Campbell. So look out for that. So I do think Miami is still in a really good spot for Cooper. I think staying home, the proximity of the University of Miami is a huge factor for Cooper. So Lamar Brown is an interesting one. Originally listed as an offensive lineman, but Miami recruiting him as a defensive lineman.
Right.
So I think Miami's in a really good spot for him as well. I think he was really impressed with his experience with Jason Taylor over the weekend. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? I mean, like he's a gold jacket guy. So I think that is a very good, of course, selling point for a guy like Lamar Brown. So he definitely enjoyed his time at the pool party as well. I feel like Miami could definitely, you know, make some more headway with Lamar Brown. I think he can be one of those players that really kind of takes this 2026 class to the top 10, just because um, just because of just you know his skill set. This guy's 6'5", nearly 300 pounds, and I think he is just kind of scratching the surface of what he could possibly be. So he is being courted by Texas A&M. I feel like Texas A&M is really a major player here because he visited A&M already, and then he is set to return to A&M as well. He's got his OV locked in for May 30th, which I feel like Miami's trying. I would assume that Miami's kind of trying to start a wave of commits. So I think the players that they feel pretty solid about are in that first weekend of May 30th, and then hopefully that kind of starts a wave of commits all through June, and then of course through July, right before the season starts, which is when most of these recruits are looking to make their commitment decision. So plenty more on CanesCounty.com. I've been just kind of putting information on the message board. Make sure you are a member of the Rivals.com network, and like I said, just promoting the promotion that's scrolling there on the bottom of the screen there. 50% off an annual subscription. Use the promo code UM Spring 25. So that's kind of all I kind of want to give. I don't want to give
Yeah.
away too much as far as recruiting is concerned. Alex, I mean, anybody else that you kind of want to know about really quick before we kind of.
First, let me comment that with so many of the names that you talk about, and I see the feedback with a lot of these guys. I think this is going to end up being maybe the type of offensive line class that Cristobal pulled in 2023, but possibly even better. 2023 was the cycle of the O-line, 24 the cycle of the D-line, 25 was a little bit more about defensive backfield. And I think Cristobal, especially because Miami is going to lose, most of their starters off of this coming year's offensive line. Probably 4 out of the 5 are going to likely move on to the NFL. So I feel like it's really heavily about offensive line. Obviously, defensive line, you can never have too many of those guys. So I feel like this is going to be a line of scrimmage heavy recruiting class. But I want to throw another name at you, and I'll shout out Roy Peterson in the chat, because this is a name I'm also curious about. At receiver is Calvin Russell. There's been a lot of talk about Syracuse and Miami for him, and obviously others that are in the mix. Do you have a strong sense at this point, Marcus, if Calvin Russell might be a Miami lean or a Syracuse lean or maybe someplace else?
I think just because he's a local guy and he's a legacy guy, of course, his mom is one of the best women's basketball players to ever don the orange and green, that Miami is always going to be in this race. And from the last time I kind of spoke to him, he is going to be, testing the waters. He's going to make sure that every stone is turned here in his recruiting process. So it's going to come down to the end there. I don't believe that he is going to commit anytime soon. I do feel like he is going to take his time with this process, and just because of that, I think the results of the season will play a big factor in his recruitment. I think if Miami puts together another 10-win season, I think Miami will be in a good spot to land a Calvin Russell, because he will see the development. He will see maybe 3 players from the wide receiving core from last year move on to the NFL, in Jacoby George, Xavier Restrepo, and a Sam Brown. He'll see that. And then, I think he will, take his visits. He will take more visits. I'm sure he's going to take visits, to different schools. I'm sure he's going to be at the University of Miami a lot. So I think from what I've gathered, he is going to be a guy that is going to wait until signing day. Even if he does decide to commit to a school, I think he will be on flip watch probably until signing day. So I think he's that type of prospect to kind of watch. So it's going to be intriguing to kind of watch his process, throughout. And then there's the basketball aspect as well. I do want to throw that in there as well, because a lot of these schools are pitching that he can play both basketball and football. And that might be smoke and mirrors,
I think so.
Because, he wants the option, but I'm not so sure that he will actually play both sports. You don't really kind of see that in this day and age so much. But he does want the option, for schools that are not pitching both, they are at a disadvantage, So Miami is one of those schools that will be pitching both, with Miami adding the new coach in Jay Lucas. He is already, or Calvin Russell is already on his radar, from what I understand. So they will be pitching basketball and football to Calvin Russell. But this is a race that won't be finalized until signing day to me.
I thought of one more I wanted to ask you about, and this is someone for the Locked On Canes listeners. I've brought him up quite a bit the last couple of weeks. He's become one of my favorites in the class of 2026, Heze Superman Kent. Now, anytime you're telling me You've got a 300-pound dude who runs a 4.7. I am interested. He can play offensive tackle. He wants to play tight end. Miami is willing to recruit him as a tight end. He was at the pool party. Marcus, where do you think Miami stands with Superman?
Yeah, I spoke to him as well. He very just he created a whole shadow over me. I thought when I was talking next to him, big kid, man, and just seems to really like Miami, and is only being recruited as a tight end. I think that needs to be clear. Right now on Rivals, we have him as an athlete, but he wants to be recruited as a tight end. From what I gathered from him, if a school is not recruiting him as a tight end, then they're basically off his list. And Miami is, of course, recruiting him as a tight end. He loves Coach Woodell. He feels like the way Coach Woodell, the Miami tight ends coach, is recruiting him is amazing. That's the word that he used. And he loves the staff. And Florida, Texas, those are really kind of the top two contenders, I think, for him. Miami's relentless when it comes to recruiting. So you know, if you don't know, now you know. They will be calling, texting, and it's relentless. And a question that I usually ask these recruits is just how often is the communication? Because that kind of gives you an idea of like which schools are really the most interested in him or said recruit, and how much the recruit is interested in said school. And he said, Florida, Texas, and Miami are the most with communication. So that's something to really, kind of watch, those three schools in his recruitment. He's another one. Well, actually, he's got his OV set for June 6th. So Miami will get him on campus again at that time. But Texas and Florida, like I said, are two schools that will be competing with Miami for Heze Kent. But he likes the tight end tradition. I did talk to him about just the fact that Miami will likely have either a first, maybe a second round pick in Elijah Arroyo in the upcoming draft. And I asked him if that's a factor for him. He said, of course, absolutely. And just their tight end tradition altogether. And, hopefully the relationship with Coach Woodell is something that kind of puts it over the top for Miami and gets a commitment for Heze Kent, because he's an impressive young man.
Yeah, and I'll add something when you talk about the importance of communication. And I think it was also you talking about on the site about Joel Ervin, who Miami just landed, who's previously a Louisville commit, decommitted from the Cardinals a couple weeks ago. He ends up locking it in with Miami, and a big part of the reason why, like, he was committed to Louisville, changed his mind because the community apparently, and I hope Jeff Brom isn't watching this because I don't want to give the guy any tips. Like, Coach Brom, just keep doing what you're doing up there, man. Don't listen to me. But like the idea that, Miami was so much better communicating with him than Louisville, because and also, and I know Miami already knows this. Don't take your verbal commits for granted. Like, it's something I noticed. Miami's always really good, Marcus. Like, they don't stop recruiting you when you're committed. Maybe some other schools do that. You take your verbals for granted and you focus on the uncommitted guys. But when you're locked in somewhere, like if his phone is blowing up, every other day with Coach Mirabal and Coach Cristobal calling him, and he's not hearing from the Louisville coaches, like that stuff is going to work in Miami's favor. Like the communication, it's I'm so grateful to be covering Miami's coaching staff. Knowing, of course, as you know better than anybody, how important recruiting is into building the backbone of your football program, to know just how diligent and how good Miami's staff is. And it requires a lot of work and a lot of extra hours. Like, being in constant communication with these guys is not easy. And that hard work pays off. These young men, they want to feel the love, especially when they're committed somewhere. You're getting more love from somewhere else. Eventually you're going to want to flip. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a great point to not take your commits for granted because I think Miami definitely took advantage of the situation with Ervin. I think schools, for whatever reason, maybe lose interest with a certain prospect or recruit, and maybe they're interested in another guy, and so the communication just kind of fall off. I mean, it's like when you're in a relationship or you're dating out there. You're not getting texts or calls from the person that you're dating, then you're probably going to move on elsewhere. Whereas someone who's actually texting those good morning texts is a little bit more often. So I think that is the case with Ervin, and I think proximity plays a factor too. This is a Fort Myers kid; he's only 2 hours away. If I was a recruit and I was from Fort Myers and it was Louisville or Miami, and I'm just like, okay, well, I can be developed by an offensive line coach who has a reputation for putting guys in the league. I mean, we expect Jalen Rivers' name to be called in the 2025 draft, and that maybe Inez Cooper the next year, very likely. So when you see that and you see you're only 2 hours away and you're not getting the communication that you want from the school that you originally committed to, then it seemed like a no-brainer for him. Like him a lot, seems very intelligent. Most of these guys are. People always say the offensive line and quarterback are like probably the most intelligent guys on a football team, and I feel that. I feel that from these recruits that Miami's recruiting. This guy is very intelligent, very well spoken type of guy. You can tell he kind of loves football. Had a chance to speak to him last week and at the pool party. So definitely a great addition for this 2026 class, and excited to see who's next. And I expect more in the next upcoming weeks as far as more players committing to Miami. That was a lot of talk on recruiting. I almost took up the entire time. Uh, but it was great stuff. It's always good stuff to talk about. But I did want to kind of mention something that kind of came up at Pro Day, man. A bunch of reporters here were on the sideline, and they were talking about, of course, Xavier Restrepo. And he's a guy who kind of came up just because he ran the 40, not the fastest 40 that you kind of want to see. I kind of heard that maybe his hamstring was maybe tightening up. It could be the reason why he ran close to around a 4.7. So the conversation kind of came up, Dono, with the other reporters that what are we going to see from Xavier Restrepo in the NFL? And Xavier Restrepo is going to go down statistically as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Miami Hurricane receiver. But before I kind of get your take on it, I do want to point out a couple of things. One, players like Mike Harley and Rambo from a couple years back, they set records too. And these guys, probably not having the best professional careers. So you have that kind of side of it. And then you have the other side of Xavier Restrepo is just a dog, He's an absolute dog who can run routes probably as good as almost anybody, and he can catch in traffic. One of the best, I would say, traits that I would say Xavier Restrepo has, to me, is the fact that he can contort his body in ways to catch the football. He has a unique way to kind of adjust his body to the football in the air. And that's something that I've noticed from him since his time in high school at St. Thomas and Deerfield Beach. So I think that is a factor that will help him in the NFL. How do you think X does on the next level?
I think he's going to be a very good pro. I mean, obviously, he's going to fill a very specific role as a slot receiver, but we've seen, guys of that mold have a lot of success in the league. With Wes Welker is a name that's always going to come up. McConkey, so it's unfortunate to me because obviously we all saw and heard about the 40-yard dash time at Pro Day. And I get it that, running in a straight line for 40 yards is one of the indicators that NFL scouts and GMs are going to use to decide, whether or not to draft a player or how soon to draft a player. But to me, the smart GMs, I think, understand that it's one small piece of the pie. You brought up the considerations of a hamstring issue, which I also heard about. So, of course, X, when he's talking with NFL teams, being interviewed by teams, hopefully he articulates that. Maybe he has some medical documentation that can back that up so teams will understand. But again, with this whole thing, I mean, if you try to define what kind of a player Xavier Restrepo is strictly by how quickly he ran 40 yards straight down a field, you're doing yourself an incredible disservice. Now, his time in the short shuttle was very respectable, which is like a different sprinting situation. And then you have the past 4 years worth of tape. I mean, specifically the past two, which obviously are the ones that really flash, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And those weren't both with Cam Ward, by the way. Obviously, he just played with the future first overall pick at quarterback. But the season before that was with, a collective of Tyler Van Dyke and Emory Williams, who started a couple games, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. With Restrepo, despite the fact that someone can look at his 40 time and say the guy is slow. Well, he's not slow in pads. He's not slow in actual game situations because he's a meticulous route runner. You talk about the athleticism and the body contortion. He's also, I know he's a shorter guy, under 6 foot, but he does have incredible athleticism and vert and really reliable hands. And so, yeah, I mean, listen, if someone is going to be swayed against Xavier Restrepo simply because you're concerned about his 40-yard dash time, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, obviously, the 40 is not going to help him. That's going to be out there. It certainly didn't help his draft status. I just hope it didn't hurt it too much because I think whoever is able to draft Restrepo, whether that happens in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, I hope in the 2nd round, that's kind of where some people had him floating around before Pro Day. I think you're going to be glad you drafted him because he is going to be so reliable. And I think he's going to be one of these next uber productive slot receivers in the NFL. So I've loved watching his journey, even going back to when he was in high school, past 4 years at Miami. And I want to keep watching that journey continue into the pros because I think Restrepo is going to be a good one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I just feel like this guy, has always played with a chip on his shoulder. And now he's got more chips, with this, with all of this going on. So I think it's just going to motivate him even more to really show people and show himself and his doubters that he is indeed a baller. So shout out to Xavier Restrepo and just what he's done for the University of Miami over the years. I was actually going through my phone recently because I just had to delete videos. I've got literally thousands of videos in my phone that I have to kind of open up space for, and I went back went back for 4 years, and I'm just and I see highlights of Xavier Restrepo at the Alabama game when he was a freshman, and he's the only one who scored in that game. I don't remember. I don't know if you remember that. That's when Derrek King,
now.
Derrek King was the quarterback at the time. Miami, of course, was blown out by Alabama that day in Atlanta. But he scored in that game. I believe that was his first touchdown of his career, and just to kind of see his journey from there to now watching him at Pro Day, it's been a pleasure to watch Xavier Restrepo, and I think he will indeed prove a lot of the doubters wrong. So we'll see where he kind of gets drafted in this upcoming draft that is coming up at the end of April. that is going to.
By the way, I want to
the
keep
Storm Tracker
sorry
podcast.
before you wrap it up. I want to keep promoting. Like, I want so badly. I would love the Tennessee Titans to draft both Ward and then a couple rounds later Restrepo. I think that could be a dynamic combination for them.
Ooh.
I'm rooting for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think about that. That would be an awesome situation for both guys. I may become a Tennessee Titans fan.
Yeah.
if I see that happening. James Williams is also on that team as well, by the way. So another former Cane. So that would be interesting to see all three of those guys playing together in the NFL. Alex Donno, once again, host of the Locked on Canes podcast, also a writer for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you check out his work on the website, and also make sure you subscribe to the website for a 50% off your annual subscription. Use the promo code UMSpring25 today. Today is the last day for this promo. So make sure you go over to CanesCounty.com for the latest in recruiting and also Miami Hurricanes athletics. Thanks again for joining me, Alex.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Awesome stuff. And that's going to wrap it up officially for the Storm Tracker podcast today. Make sure, like I said, subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for the 50% annual subscription. And also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Also follow this podcast on all platforms. Until the next episode.